right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to episode number 2 of the Dharma Digs Podcast, a podcast in pursuit of purposeful living. I'm your host, Taylor Winchester, also known as TW, and I appreciate you being here as always, so thanks. Today, episode 2, we're going to expand a little bit off of episode 1. It'll be another rather brief episode, but I'm going to talk a little bit about silence as a superpower and contemplative thinking. As well as a little later in the episode, I'll share maybe a little teaser of future episodes and who you can expect on some upcoming interview podcasts. So thanks for being here as always. Let's get started. Silence as a superpower. For me in 2020, oh man, what a year, right? We find ourselves in the midst of this pandemic and a constant stream of content in regards to news and media and people's opinions on wearing masks and what the proper way to handle and really live under these circumstances are. And we're all really trying to figure that out. But what I've found to be extremely beneficial, because early on in this pandemic, I think we all could probably agree that it came with a bit of anxieties and uncertainties and things that tended to, at least for me, cause more stress in my life when maybe we didn't see it coming. And, you know, I've done some research on my own and thinking about ways that I can and kind of deal with these uncertainties and trying to feel more comfort and ease in this scenario. And one thing that I came across is really just how important silence can be in trying to separate ourselves from our thoughts. And in my research, I've read that experts estimate that the mind thinks between 60 and 80,000 thoughts per day. 60 and 80,000 thoughts per day, which is a ridiculous amount of number. And it was almost hard to believe. But then when you kind of put that into context, you realize how important, or at least it started to become more apparent to me, that the importance of finding time to slow those thoughts down within my brain and really quiet them down to feel a sense of silence and become comfortable with silence. And thinking about different scenarios of this, I mean, if you think about conversations with folks, how many times have you been in a conversation, maybe at a networking event or a friend, family, whatever, it could be business or it could be personal, but you're having a conversation, and while somebody else is speaking and kind of sharing their 2 cents or their insight on whatever it is you're talking about, and you're already formulating in your own mind your response or the next thing you're going to say. So it's almost you've taken that conscious aspect of listening to what the other person is saying out of your space, because you're already literally using your thought process to determine what you're going to respond with or how you're going to respond. So there are many different scenarios here. That's just a quick example. But what I've found within the context of 2020 is that designating time on either a daily or at least multiple days in a week span to really dedicate some time to shut down all the external noise, not be on my phone and looking at social media, not have music playing in the background or a podcast going, or reading the newspaper and consuming news and media and all of those things. Those just add even more more patterns of thought and almost chaos and confusion, in a sense of when we're trying to process something that is really something we've never dealt with before. And so for me, finding time to set aside, and usually starting off the day is the best way to do it, but to sit in a meditative state or in a moment of silence. And the difference, I would say, from comparing this to a meditation or prayer practice, is that you're not necessarily using a mantra or using asking or praying to a deity or anything. It's more of just trying to find the gaps between those thoughts and that moment of true silence and true kind of quiet contemplative pondering, per se. And I guess that it's hard to kind of articulate it precisely, because I feel like if you say contemplative thinking, that leads back to where you're contemplating things, so you're thinking and you're almost causing more thoughts to start to happen. And this is really about trying to quiet everything down and the benefits of that, because for me, that's where I've really been able to find some sense of calm and a sense of a little bit of a better sense of acceptance within these turbulent times we live in. And in turn, as I continue to do that and become more consistent in that practice, what it has also allowed is for me to feel like I'm getting a little bit closer to understanding what passion and purpose and conscious living are really all about. And that is how that, this topic of silence and contemplative pondering really play into the overall or overarching topic of this podcast, because in order for me to feel like I'm doing anything positive in a sense of looking and searching for my own internal peace and purpose within life, has had to come from times when I've slowed down and really allowed my mind a moment to relax. And that's not an easy thing to do. I think a lot of folks struggle with it. I know myself, when I started a meditative practice, it was really difficult to not get antsy, not overthink things and think about whether or not I'm doing this right. And, the more I've delved into it, the more I've found that it's really not about doing it right or wrong or how you're practicing it. It's really just about designating time to become comfortable in silence. And that's what I wanted to just share a little bit about, because I think that can transition us into these conversations with other folks and these specific quotes that I'm going to be reading and excerpts that I'm going to be pulling from various sources that really engage us in a deeper conversation about applying some of these concepts to our day-to-day lives. And a lot of that has come, even me developing this concept has really come from allowing myself more time to also sit in silence and find time to separate myself from my thoughts and all those external kind of distractions that present themselves within our day-to-day. So I've talked a little bit about silence. Let me read you, because a lot of how these future episodes are going to play off are going to be conversation pieces and interviews with special guests that I'm bringing on. And we'll talk a little bit about maybe where their background is, what led them to where they are within their creative journey or within their career path. But then I'm actually going to pitch them on a few excerpts, as I mentioned, prior to the interview, so that it allows us to dive into some language and conversation around these different topics that we'll be covering. And so with that being said, today, this is talking about silence and how that's played a role in my search for purpose and search for a more peaceful, internal peaceful living. I figured I would share a quote with you from Henry David Thoreau about silence. And this quote is, it's made me think, and I think it applies to this podcast because I'll read it to you first. Let's do that. How about that? Silence is the communing of conscious soul with itself. So silence is the communing of a conscious soul with itself. It's a perfect segue for me to kind of use this quote in the terms of how I've used it, not knowing. I just found this quote as I was starting to prepare for this episode. But communing, if you take the term communing, and it's really talking about to share one's intimate thoughts or feelings with someone, especially on a spiritual level. So if you think about that, communing of a conscious soul with itself, you're basically, I take that as saying, like, how are we allowing a moment to come into a sense of practice within ourselves of really being truly aware and truly awake and conscious with our soul and with ourself. And the more I've devoted time to doing and practicing that, the more I've really felt alive and felt a sense of purpose and felt a sense of drive and passion for the things that I feel like maybe make a difference in my life and hopefully impact the greater good of society and humanity as a whole. So once again, that quote is, "Silence is the communing of a conscious soul with itself." And that is a quote by Henry David Thoreau. So as I mentioned, most of these future podcasts are actually going to be episodes in conversation with others. And I will be expelling some interesting tidbits of language that I've found in my studies, and I'm also going to have the guests present some language or conversation pieces and excerpts and quotes and things of that nature too. So as I mentioned, this is going to be a little shorter episode again, as it's an intro, and I want to go ahead and start talking about my future guests. So the next episode you can expect coming out, if not today, very soon. And that's going to be with Leonardo Solis. He is a contact I have met here in the Charlotte, North Carolina area over my time in the music industry. He's a great dude. We dive into some really cool concepts, talking a little bit about uncertainty and how it's played a role, obviously, in 2020, but really also some things that both he and I have found resourceful in a sense of dealing with uncertain times and trying to kind of become comfortable or okay with those uncertain times. And then episode number 4 is going to feature Mr. Sam Taylor, who is also another contact I've made here in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. Sam, as is Leo, they are both musicians, songwriters. They come from a little bit different background in a sense of the type of music that they put out there and they are involved with, but I think that you will enjoy both of these conversations. Sam and I talk a little bit more about just adjusting within these crazy times and how we can learn from others. And if you haven't seen the other quote that kind of accompanies this overall podcast concept, it is a Ram Dass quote that basically I'm ad-libbing it here, but it's essentially saying that when you know how to listen, everyone is the guru. And I really love that quote because in this context, these conversations with future interviews, both of those I've already recorded and they'll be coming out real soon, but other interviews I have lined up as well. I'm excited because I've learned so much from other people and from having conversations and listening consciously to what other folks have to say. And I'm always working on being better at that. But I'm really excited because those conversations are opportunities for us to all gain a little bit of wisdom and nuggets of enlightenment along our way. So I may have asked you in the first episode if you are enjoying what you hear so far. I really hope that you'll continue listening. I hope that you will share this podcast with your friends. And if you have any topics or conversation or suggested guest, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find me personally on all the social media outlets at TW Creates. My website is wcreative.com, and you can follow along this podcast on the social media outlets at Dharma Digs Podcast. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. That's a wrap on episode number 2. Can't wait for episode number 3 and episode number 4. They're coming at you real soon. So thank you, as always, for being here. And until next time, peace, love, and happiness. Namaste.